On January 13th, the people of Taiwan are going to be electing an executive and a legislature. And the political balance in the Taiwan Strait area is conditioned very seriously by the domestic politics in the three areas there, the United States, Taiwan, and China. So the election is going to be an important factor. Now, what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, or what the Taiwan workshop is going to do, is to have three sessions. We're going to have one session tonight where we'll be talking about the expectations in Taipei and in Beijing and in Washington of the possible outcomes and the possible impact of the elections. We're going to, in another month, when the political parties of Taiwan finally get themselves straightened out and we have candidates, in another month on January 15th, December 15th, sorry, we'll be doing another session that we'll talk about the candidates and the actual mechanics of the election. And then the Taiwan Study Workshop of the Fairbanks Center will be going to Taiwan in January for the elections. And we'll have a third session about the result of the elections. So this is the opening session in our addressing the question of the Taiwan elections. So, Jachingor, would you like to go first?
No, maybe Richard.
You want to? All right, we'll give you that. Wei Ting, can you go?
Yeah, I can go first. Since
Sure, do
we're
it.
going to talk about Taiwan's election, I can start from Taiwan's perspective, I guess. I
Yeah,
don't think we need 20 minutes, but I will kind of very briefly touch upon what I think about the issue and see if there are, we can have more discussion when we have follow-up questions. Okay, so all right, everyone. My name is Wei Ting Yan. I'm assistant professor at Franklin Marshall College in Pennsylvania. And so thanks, Dr. Goldstein, for inviting me to join this panel. And I think he has chosen a perfect timing for this panel because up until yesterday, Taiwan's election has kind of been like stuck in the middle of nowhere because the opposition party have been struggling to negotiate and form a coalition for about the past 2 months. And so for the past 2 months, we were only certain about one candidate, and that was the ruling party's candidate, William Lai. And up until yesterday, when I was thinking about what I want to say in the panel, I realized that we were still very unsure if there will be 2 or 3 or even 4 candidates running for the election. But there was a major breakthrough that happened today. And so that's why I think it's a perfect timing to have this panel, because the negotiation led by the former President Ma Ying-jeou have finally made some substantial progress. The KMT and the TPP have finally reached a consensus and decided to run together. Even though it is not yet clear who will be the presidential candidate and who will be the vice president candidate, at least they make the decision to form a coalition now. I do believe that there is a higher likelihood that Hou You-yi will be the presidential candidate and Ko Wen-je will be the vice president candidate. But we will kind of know for sure when the official announcement is made on Saturday. And so right now, right at this point, I think it appears that there will be 3 candidates. So William Lai from the DPP, and one set of candidates from the coalition of the KMT plus the TPP. And we also have Terry Guo, who is running independently for now. So that's what we have. Because the negotiation, kind of the coalition, was just formed, the integration of the KMT and the TPP, I think, can have significant influence on the election. However, I think it may still be too early right now to tell what exactly the impact would be. I feel like it will be more certain once we wait for the dust to settle. And that, I think, will happen in the next couple of weeks. And so I decided that, with that said, I still think that there are certain things that we can discuss with regard to the potential impacts of the 2024 election. And so I want to kind of touch upon this from three perspectives. One is the potential outcome, the election outcome and its impacts on the relation with the United States, and its potential impacts on Taiwan's future relation with China. And then what might be happening domestically, depending on what the election outcome will be. So first, on Taiwan's electoral outcome and whether that will affect the future of U.S.-Taiwan relation, my general sense is that I believe that regardless of which party comes to power, we shouldn't expect to see any significant change in policy toward the United States. I think Taiwan is likely to continue cooperation with the United States to enhance its self-defense capacities, and we have been seeing this trajectory moving toward a positive direction over the past few years. And I also think that to maintain peace across the Taiwan Strait, it is mutually beneficial for the United States to also consistently provide Taiwan with military assistance, following the Taiwan Relation Act. Even though we have seen from time to time that the KMT is trying to differentiate itself from the DPP in terms of its policy stance on Taiwan-related issue, on China-related issue, I don't think any of them come out and say explicitly about distancing itself from the United States. And I think both parties in this regard will continue to welcome U.S. support, but we might see the KMT prefer a more even low-key approach if they do win the presidency. And also, I think in terms of the military kind of self-defense capacity, I think we will still see an increasing in the military budget expenditure, regardless of which party will be in the office, because it has been clear that the public opinion in Taiwan is supporting Taiwan to increase its self-defense capacity. And a good example is that a while ago, Hou Yu-ih actually tried to propose to shorten the military service from 12 months back to 4 months again. So we know, like, recently, President Tsai Ing-wen just decided to extend the military service to 12 months. So Hou Yu-ih was trying to propose to cut it back to 4 months again, but immediately backfired because it didn't really get public support. So he retracted that policy. And I think it shows that the society is supporting and welcoming increasing military budget and enhancing Taiwan's self-defense capacity. And so in that regard, I think the people in Taiwan will welcome a continuation with working with the United States. And I think because of that, both parties will work toward that direction as well. So that's how I view the U.S.-Taiwan relation in the future. So second, if we're talking about the potential electoral outcome and how that will affect a future China-Taiwan relation, well, it depends on who wins the presidency. In my opinion, I think if the DPP wins the office, we can almost certainly expect that things will remain probably the same in the short run, the way it is now. We wouldn't see too much change with respect to Taiwan's relationship with China if the DPP wins office, because since Tsai Ing-wen went into office in 2016, we have been seeing, China decreasing or cutting ties with Taiwan in various ways, including examples such as stopping Chinese tourism, tourists coming to Taiwan, or trying to convert more of Taiwan's allies to form diplomatic relations with China. And because the DPP does not recognize the 1992 consensus, if they continue to rule, I don't expect much change in the future. However, I think it would be interesting if the KMT or the KMT plus the TPP coalition captures the presidency. If the KMT wins the office, I think what it remains to be seen with regard to how they decide to deal with China. So what I mean is that we know that for the longest time, the KMT has been forming its China policy based on the 1992 consensus. And briefly speaking, the 1992 consensus is one China, different interpretation. And so from the KMT's perspective, the interpretation has been the ROC, the Republic of China, represent Taiwan, PRC represent the mainland. The two governments, they belong to the same country, even though it's not unified yet. And so this has been the official stance of the KMT. But we know that in 2019, on January 2nd, 2019, Xi Jinping had a national speech on Taiwan. And in that national speech, he made it very clear for the first time that he didn't exactly equate that, but he kind of made it very clear that the way he sees the 1992 consensus is the one country, two system framework, which is the framework that's used in Hong Kong. And so it was the first time he kind of talked about two things that together, like 1992 consensus and the one country, two system. That was January 2019. And so after that, we have been seeing what happened in Hong Kong in the past couple of years. And so it's very clear to the Taiwanese people that the one country, two system framework is not what the Taiwanese people want. It is very clear. And so we can imagine that if the KMT wins the presidency again, they will want to resort back to the 1992 consensus. But the key question and the more important question, I think, is to what extent China will allow the KMT's version of the 1992 consensus. I think that is a question up in the air. If China decides or insists that the one country, two system framework should be the interpretation of the 1992 consensus, then it will shrink the space for the KMT. So basically will shrink the space the KMT has to navigate its China relation. And so there are times in which that China right now sometimes would view the ROC in Taiwan as de facto independence and does not allow it. If they insist on this, then it will be up to the KMT to have a counter argument or strategy. Right now, so far, we have not yet seen the KMT come up with a very clear strategy in this regard. If they do win the presidency, I think we kind of have to wait and see what happens with respect to their strategy with China. So that is my second point on the potential outcome and its impacts on future China-Taiwan relation. So the last aspect I kind of want to touch upon is what might be the election outcomes impacts on domestic politics. So the caveat is that this is the one area I think actually with the most uncertainties because it is full of surprise, Taiwan's election. I would say in general, the election should work more in favor for the KMT for a couple of reasons. First, since Taiwan democratized in 1996, no ruling party has been able to actually win three terms consecutively. And so the DPP administration has been in office for 2 terms now. Voters in general are ready for a change. And just like, other mature democracies, voters are thinking about having a party turnover in order to enhance check and balance. And if you look at the poll number, it shows at this as well, because it says that more than 50% of the voters say that they would prefer the DPP not to return back to the office. And so I would say that it will work more in favor for the KMT. And now with the coalition forming, it certainly will become a way more close election. But with that being said, exactly because now they're forming a coalition, it may be a silver lining for the DPP, because now if it goes the way it is, it will become a two-party elections again. And if China issue becomes at the center of the election again, it actually may motivate voters to, turn out and come out and vote. And that might actually work in favor for the DPP a little bit. But the more interesting part will be actually that needs to be watched more closely after the election is whether there is a divided government or not. So whether the presidency and the legislative branch are occupied the same party or by different parties. Because even if the DPP wins the presidency, it is likely that they will not gain majority in the legislative branch. And if that happens, then we will run in a situation in which the president has to decide whether they will nominate a premier that will be endorsed by the majority party in the legislative branch. And so since Taiwan democratized, there were only one example of divided government, and that was the Chen Shui-bian's first term in 2000. And so if it turns out to be a divided government, then it will put Taiwan's domestic politics into an even more uncertain situation, because we know that kind of for a divided government to function, it will require more informal norms and informal institutions to operate. And if we think about Taiwan's democracy, relatively speaking, it is still kind of new. Taiwan just had its first presidential election in 1996, and we only had our first party turnover in 2000. So in this sense, we don't have that many informal institutions in place supporting a divided government to work. So if that does happen, I think the level of some uncertainty it creates may actually hinder the policy-making process. And I feel like we will have a better idea a month from now to gauge the likelihood of a divided government in the post-election scenario. But I don't want to end in a very negative, pessimistic note. I do want to say that being said, even if there is a possibility for a divided government, it is not necessarily that no bills will be passed or it will just be a implicitly chaotic situation. Two reasons. One, if you actually look at the candidate's policy platform, if you look at Hou Youyi's policy platform and his op-ed in Foreign Affairs in September, you will realize that his policy platform is very, very similar to the platform proposed by William Lai. The main difference they have is the nuclear policy. Other than the nuclear policy, they're very similar, especially with regard to foreign policy. So they might have more in common than we thought. And if that's the case, then we may still expect to see some of the kind of bills that can reach consensus faster to still be put on the floor and be passed. And second, even though Taiwan only had a divided government one time before, research actually shows that there were same level of bills that were actually passed in a divided government in between 2000 and 2004. And the reason was because different party kind of anticipated a boycott or objection from the other party. They already anticipated this. So when they made the bill, proposed the bill, they already made compromises before they send the bill into the floor. So that's kind of one kind of positive spin of a potential divided government that may happen after the 2024 election. But everything kind of remains. We have to wait a little bit until we can have a more certain answer on any of those questions. All right, so thank you. That concludes my remark.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I forgot to introduce everybody. So let me just take a moment to introduce Wei-Ting Yen, who is a professor at Franklin and Marshall College. Richard Bush, who is Richard Bush. He has served both in government and in academia, and is now you're a non-resident fellow of Brookings Institution.
That's right.
And Jia Guo, who is known to many of us, is the former dean of the School of International Affairs at Peking University and is currently a professor there. Guo, do you want to go now? Yes or no?
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Well, good morning and good evening. Thank you very much, Steve, for arranging this meeting. And also, it's great to see Richard, and great to know Wei-Ting. First of all, I think the election, as far as I can get it, it's a three-way election. But if you add Guo Taiming, then it's four-way. But the first three, Lai Ching-te, Hou You-yi, and Ke Wen-je, they're popular, according to popular poll, they are the most likely to get elected. But among the three, Lai has the greatest chance, according to the polls. But until yesterday, the Hou You-yi and Ke Wen-je finally agreed to have a joint ballot. So if they put their resources together, then they have more support than Lai Ching-te. So their chance to get elected has increased dramatically. But who knows? Election is election. A lot of uncertainties. And I think in the days to come, we are going to see heated competition among the four candidates, and also various kinds of efforts to outmaneuver the other party. But who knows? Maybe we are going to have Hou You-yi and Ke Wen-je if they can stay together. So what are the implications for cross-strait relations and for Taiwan's mainland policy and also cross-strait relations? I think if Lai is elected, probably we are going to witness more difficulties. Not because that he may push more aggressively for Taiwan independence, but because he had a record. And also there is deep suspicion on the part of the mainland about him, about his intentions, about what he's going to do. And then probably the two sides would continue the current level of negative interactions. So the both sides will be very wary of what the other side will do, and cross-strait, people-to-people relations would be restricted, and also economic relations would be affected. ECFA probably would be at stake. So and of course, Lai probably would appeal to the U.S. to help when problems occur, and then the U.S. may feel obliged to support him, and then we have a situation of greater tension in the Taiwan Strait. But if Ho and Ko Wen-je elected, I think at the moment, if Ho elected, probably the relationship across the strait will be the more predictable, is smoother. And Ko Wen-je probably would also would be close to that. But of course, if Guo Taiming has a chance, I think the situation probably would also be quite similar. And then probably the cross-strait people-to-people exchange would resume faster. And from the Taiwan side, probably would lift most of the restrictions on people-to-people exchange. And economic relationship, I think, the mainland probably would more likely to extend the ACTA arrangement. But of course, from the mainland probably would not expect great changes across the Taiwan Strait, even though if the Hou You-yi, Ko Wen-je, and or Guo Taiming gets elected, probably a situation more like the situation when Ma Ying-jeou was in charge would emerge, and this probably in a way would reduce tension across the Taiwan Strait, and also reduce the conflicts between China and the U.S. over Taiwan. As far as China's expectation of the U.S. is concerned, I think China hope that the U.S. would not support the DPP. Of course, the U.S. government has been saying that we are neutral. We don't mess up with internal politics in Taiwan. But there is always the suspicion that the U.S., at least on the part of some Chinese, the U.S. is supporting DPP. And also, China hopes that the U.S. would try not to send the wrong signals to Taiwan. In other words, to even when the U.S. does not want a military conflict, but then if it sends the wrong signals, like supporting Taiwan independence, then the Taiwan independence activists would push for independence, and this would draw the two sides, the Taiwan Strait, into a battle zone. And probably this is, as far as from the Chinese government's perspective, this is not in the U.S. interest either. And also for that purpose, for that reason, in part for that reason, the U.S. should reduce its arms sales to Taiwan to make sure that the DPP, especially the extremists, the Taiwan independence extremists, would not take adventures on the part of the Taiwan independence. And what's going to happen with the Taiwan's authorities policy on the mainland. I think, well, if Hou Youyi or Ke Wen-je or even Guo Taiming got elected, then probably the situation will become more stable in the Taiwan Strait, as I just alluded to. But if Lai Ching-te comes to power, then probably more instability, more second guessing, and if the U.S. intervenes, then probably it will be more complicated, and this would lead to greater military pressures on the part of the mainland against Taiwan. But as long as Taiwan authorities does not seek for Taiwan independence, the real independence, then I think war over Taiwan is very unlikely. But one cannot rule out the situation that some people are irrational enough to take the path of Taiwan independence. And also, the situation will be different, as I mentioned, if the other three candidates, one of the other three candidates, won the election. The cross-strait relationship would move somewhat back toward the situation when Ma Ying-jeou was in charge. So the chance of a military conflict is even less likely. The current situation across the Taiwan Strait, however, people are unhappy with the one country, two systems in the Taiwan Strait. The current situation with the Taiwan Strait is, to me, is a de facto one country, two system arrangement. Okay. As far as the Chinese government is concerned, Taiwan is not an independent territory. In other words, it has a law against separatism. The name of that law suggests that in sovereignty terms, Taiwan has never been independent, so it's still part of China. The current division in the Taiwan Strait is a political division resulting from a civil war rather than resulting from the successful Taiwan independence. So we have one country, and also the mainland and the Taiwan practice different political systems and economic systems, and different arrangements on various kinds of things. So it's two systems. It's not a one country, two system arrangement formally negotiated between China and another party, but it is like Hong Kong or Macau, but it is a de facto situation of one country, two systems, whether people in Taiwan like it or not. So I think the best Taiwan can do is to seek a better arrangement under this umbrella of one de facto, one country, two systems. It is good for Taiwan. It is good for people on the mainland, and also probably it's also good for the world. We hope that this election will not change that much toward in the direction of conflict. And instead, should change, should make the necessary changes for stabilization and improvement of cross-strait relations in the best interest of people of both sides and also of the region and the world. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Ingo, thank you very much. Richard.
Yes. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be with Tsinghua and Professor Yen in this program. I'm going to talk about the American perspective on these elections, mainly the views of the US government, but there are other views, of course, and I'll touch on those. Allow me to start with a personal anecdote, which I promise is relevant to tonight's discussion. And I would note that this is a special day also because President Biden and President Xi Jinping have just met in California, and we are now getting some reports about the meeting. But my anecdote, in December 1999, I was the chairman of the American Institute in Taiwan, and I traveled to Taiwan in that capacity. At the time, presidential elections in Taiwan were held in March, so this visit occurred 3 months before those elections. My purpose was to explain the perspective of the Clinton administration concerning those elections and US policy. Now, this was a complicated time in Taiwan politics. The candidate of the DPP was Chen Shui-bian. And there's been enough discussion about its approach to Taiwan status. I don't need to repeat it. But at that time, a move by a DPP government towards de jure independence would have been contrary to the position of the US government, that we didn't support Taiwan independence, and inconsistent with our abiding interests, quote unquote, in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Washington at that time took seriously the PRC's warning that it would respond with force to an independence initiative. Meanwhile, the ruling party, the Kuomintang, was divided. Vice President Lien Zhan was the official KMT candidate, and James Song Chuyu, who had held a number of positions within the KMT and the ROC government, ended up running as an independent. And they ended up splitting the vote, and Chen Shui-bian won with a little bit less than 40%. It was a very competitive race, but it was a divided race. But before the election actually occurred, in December of 1999, I met with each of the candidates and, on instructions from the Clinton administration, conveyed a message concerning its attitude toward the election. And this message included several simple points. First of all, the United States took a neutral position on the election. We did not favor one candidate over the others. It was the Taiwan people who should pick their leader and not Washington. Second, we would seek to work with whoever the people of Taiwan picked to be their president. Third, what was important to the United States was not who became the president, but the policies of that person and whether they aligned or did not align with US interests concerning Taiwan. If the interests did align, then there'd be no problem. If there was disagreement or conflict, we would talk about it and try and resolve those differences. And the implication was that if we couldn't resolve the differences, it would affect our bilateral relationship. At the end of my visit, I publicly met with a group of eager reporters and made essentially the same statement. That way, it would be clear not only to the candidates themselves, but to the Taiwan public what the views of the United States were. And the rest is history. Chen won with less than a majority. The KMT maintained control of the legislative yuan. For a couple of years, US-Taiwan relations were not bad. Then in late 2002, Chen Shui-bian changed his political strategy in ways that the George W. Bush administration found to be inconsistent with US interests, and the relationship suffered. So let us fast forward 24 years. A month ago, Laura Rosenberger, the incumbent chair of AIT, traveled to Taiwan for a visit. This was 3 months before the 2024 election, which is going to be held in January. And her main purpose was to state the US perspective on that contest. And I would say that if anything, the political situation, while it is similar to the one that existed in 2000, was even more complicated than it was then. You have heard from Professor Yen about the key actors and the political dynamics. I think the outcome is really up for grabs. One question one can ask is, will the KMT-TPP coalition actually work? Another, will young people who have supported Koanja desert him and go to the DPP? I have no idea. These are things that will play out. Now, during Ms. Rosenberger's visit, she met with President Tsai and then met privately with each of the officially registered candidates. Towards the end of her visit, she met with reporters to discuss an array of issues, but also Washington's view of the election. And she said the following: America is confident and respectful of Taiwan's transparent democracy and its free and fair election. The United States, quote, does not and will not take sides in Taiwan's free and fair election, unquote. Washington, quote, looks forward to working with whomever Taiwan voters choose as their leader, unquote. And U.S. interests in Taiwan and, quote, our deep and abiding interests in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait will not change. She also repeated a number of elements of U.S. One China policy, including Washington's clear and long-term expectation of the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences, free from coercion, in a manner that is acceptable to the people of Taiwan. And she urged Beijing not to interfere in the elections. Now, if you detect some similarities between what I said in December 1999 and what Laura Rosenberger said last month, you would not be wrong. And this is not accidental. What each of us said reflects an approach to elections in fellow democracies that the U.S. has adopted based on long experience. We accept that people in those democratic systems have agency and that Washington cannot afford to alienate a popular party before it gains power. I can say that I've observed up close how this approach is implemented, and the U.S. policy is what we say it is. Now, looking forward, based on a couple of these principles, if the positive U.S.-Taiwan relationship of the last 15 years will continue as it has, it will depend on the policies of the next Taiwan president, of course, and their consistency with U.S. interests. Speaking practically, it will also depend on who America elects as its next president in late 2024. I think you know what I mean. I should note that the U.S. government's approach is not the only American approach. There are other ones. First, there are some scholars in the United States who believe that President Tsai has acted in increasingly provocative ways towards China and touched its bottom line or gone over it, and that the Trump and Biden administrations have not reined her in. The Biden administration disagrees with this view and believes that President Tsai has been quite restrained. Second, there is an active and vocal Taiwanese American community in America that is pro-independence, and which I imagine would prefer that the Biden administration take the side of the DPP in this election. Third, I would point to Congressman Mike McCall of California. He's the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he's offered the view that the KMT is the PRC's ally and would act in the PRC's interests and against American interests if it came to power. Now, returning to U.S. policy, I would note that a couple of implications flow from this stance towards Taiwan's election. First of all, the United States government does not prejudge how electoral candidates will govern if they win office. The candidates' past careers and campaign statements are certainly not trivial, but they are not the only data points. Politicians can change their views as their careers evolve. They do make pledges in the campaign to get votes, but once in office, they may do something different. American officials are clear-eyed, but as I noted, they must be ready to deal with an election winner about whom they may have had doubts in the past. Second, and following from that, the US government does not set preconditions for its interaction with any party in a democratic system, except for a party committed to the use of violence. While maintaining a hard-headed realism, we seek to engage the leaders of all democratic parties, first, and all candidates, first to fully understand their policy views and their consequences, and to make certain that those leaders fully understand the interests of the United States and how they intersect with the candidates' policy views. This has certainly been the case with Taiwan. Thus, Laura Rosenberger described her role as maintaining communications channels with candidates in the presidential election. At her Taipei press conference last month, she said that the purpose of her meetings during that trip with the designated candidates was to understand their visions for Taiwan and to clarify U.S. priorities and interests. I should emphasize, moreover, that Ms. Rosenberger is not the only person involved in this American engagement. Much of the work is being done by our able diplomats in Taipei. This is as true today as it was in 2000. Actually, it's even more true. Now, the purpose of this engagement of candidates from the U.S. point of view is to shape and deepen the thinking of Taiwan leaders, to lay a foundation for effective communication and cooperation with whomever becomes president. I also believe that the statements that Ms. Rosenberger conveyed have a bearing on what Steve posed as the principal focus of this discussion, the possible impact of these elections on the political environment in Taiwan and the security situation in the area. Allow me to tease out some implications of the U.S. formulation. Here, a key variable is how the PRC responds to the election results. I think we can do this by thinking about scenarios that may develop after the inauguration of the new Taiwan president on May 20th next year. And here I'll be paralleling what my colleagues on the panel have done. The scenario that will likely animate fervid discussions in the media, the blogosphere, and some in the US Congress is that if William Lai wins, Beijing will assume that overtly or covertly he will move to de jure independence for Taiwan, and that China will then prepare for a preemptive war. Excuse me. Now, in my view, this is a cartoon version of Taiwan PRC-US relations that has little chance of happening. Whatever Lai's background, he has moved to a position that suggests that his policies will be in continuity with those of President Tsai. He is not a risk taker the way Chen Shui-bian was. He no doubt knows that the Taiwan public, A, strongly favors peace, and B, understands that moving towards independence would lead to war, and C, it would be a war in which the United States would probably not intervene. So that induces restraint. Also, one might note that the PLA is probably not ready to undertake a major military campaign against Taiwan. The risks involved are high, and Xi Jinping faces a number of domestic challenges. Another highly unlikely scenario that I almost don't have to mention is movement towards unification under China's formula of one country, two systems. On this, the odds are virtually zero, even if Hou You-yi, the KMT candidate, or Ko Wen-je, the TPP candidate, becomes president. The public opposition to unification in Taiwan is just too strong. I would also note that as far as people in Taiwan are concerned, there are quite a lot of uncertainties about what a one China policy or a one country, two systems approach for Taiwan would mean. And I think it's fair that they want to know in advance. So what are the more realistic scenarios? Let us assume that the KMT and TPP implement their plan for a joint ticket, and that the ticket wins in January. Would Beijing be more accommodating than it has been to Tsai Ing-wen and instead respond more like it did to Ma Ying-jeou in 2008? I would certainly hope so, because the current level of tensions is rather dangerous and a cooling off is in order. I think that Beijing's approach to this government will be better than it has been towards Tsai Ing-wen, but I'm not sure how likely a Ma-type coexistence would be. Going back in time, with both Ma and Tsai, Beijing imposed a precondition that each accept a formula known as the 1992 consensus. Professor Yen has discussed this. All I should say is that Ma accepted this explicitly, and Tsai Ing-wen did so elusively. Beijing chose to cooperate with Ma, but towards Tsai Ing-wen and her administration, it has conducted a campaign of coercion without violence. I'll spare you a theological discussion of the consensus, but simply note that Beijing has never accepted Ma Ying-jeou's public definition of that consensus, that it's one country, different interpretations. It did tolerate it coming from Ma. The PRC might well have trouble accepting or tolerating how Hou You-yi and Ko Wen-je talk about the 1992 consensus. Ho has said, quote, that he supports a 1992 consensus that conforms with the Republic of China Constitution. There may be a problem in that Beijing rejects even the existence of the Republic of China. Ko Wen-je has addressed the 1992 consensus recently in a couple of different ways. In June, he claimed that, quote, China itself has not made clear its definition of the 1992 consensus. In September, he observed that the consensus had been stigmatized in Taiwan and that he would deal with the issue pragmatically and not get stuck in disputes over terminology. So good luck with that. If hypothetically Ko or Ho become president, but neither is willing to meet PRC demands to publicly endorse the 1992 consensus based on its definition, then Beijing may not extend the same kind of cooperation it did during the Ma administration. And it might even apply a, let's call it a low level of coercion towards it. If Vice President Lai is elected president, I think that the most likely scenario will be that the PRC will continue its campaign of coercion without violence and perhaps increasing it a little bit. To repeat, the purpose of that campaign is to undermine the confidence of the Taiwan people. Now, coming back to the US policy, for a long time, the United States has helped make Taiwan more secure by selling arms and providing military training. China has sought for more than 3 decades to match and support Taiwan's military power, and it is succeeding. Washington, in turn, is adopting new ways to help Taiwan militarily to maintain deterrence. In the past, we were relatively quiet about what we were doing in order to avoid diplomatic problems with Beijing. As I've suggested, coercion without violence has a different objective. That is to undermine the confidence of the people in Taiwan about their future. Washington has come to see Beijing's coercion as contrary and inconsistent with its interest in peace even though it is free of violence. So if the United States is going to help Taiwan counter this approach, we need to use a wide array of tools, including military tools. And since the target of coercion is public confidence, logically, we need to be a lot more public in talking about our support. And that is what has happened, actually. Now, to close, I've focused completely on the presidential election and possible scenarios that might stem from the results. But there are also elections for all 113 seats of the legislative elections, and the results of those contests will be quite consequential. The consensus view in Taiwan seems to be that the DPP will lose its absolute majority that it has had since 2016, and that the party that gets the most seats will only have a plurality. This means, I believe, that governance in Taiwan will become more difficult than it already is. Passing legislation will require a lot of negotiations on policy issues within parties, among party caucuses in the legislature, between the legislature and the executive. Professor Yan has noted that it's not impossible to pass bills under those circumstances, but it's harder. Moreover, if a TPP-KMT ticket wins the presidential election, there will probably be sort of intra-coalition negotiations that take place. Now, on the one hand, such an outcome is an unsurprising result of Taiwan's democratic system. A dispersion of power and an increased difficulty to formulate and approve policies appear to reflect the public will to some extent. Yet, I think that Taiwan faces a number of policy challenges, both internal and external, and political parties have not always been able to reach consensus on how to address them. How to cope with China is obviously the most pressing one. These are tough issues, to be sure. If they weren't difficult, solutions would have been found a long time ago. But because the stakes are so high for Taiwan and its 23 million people, I believe that political leaders of all parties will have to work even harder to craft policies that receive broad public support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any of the participants like to comment on views expressed by the other participants? I'll allow you first go, and then I've got some questions, and I expect we'll get some from the audience. But was anything raised that some of you would like to talk more about or challenge?
I'm fine. I'll take a pass.
You'll take a pass. All right. Well, let me ask Wei Ting. You're talking about divided government and how that might not have an effect. But as far as mainland policy is concerned, in Taiwan, that's in the executive office. So divided government could very well have a real influence on the nature of Taiwan's mainland policy, with two different parties attempting to influence it in ways favorable to them. Would you say that?
So, okay, so I think on policies related to mainland China, there is, military policy, foreign policy. I think, as I stated in my remarks, I think even if it's a divided government, in terms of policy, I guess, military-wise, towards related to U.S. and military capacity, I think the public opinion has been clear about increasing Taiwan's self-defense capacity. So I think that will create a constraint for how the politicians would interact with each other. On the other hand, I think on the specifically China-related policy, like Professor Jia talked about, different government may have different economic ties with China. I agree that will be a more complicated situation there. We kind of observe exactly. Then I feel like there was a civil society will play a role as well in this process in terms of like what the relation should be with China. And so I agree with you that I think on specific policy related to China, especially economic and people-to-people policy, that may be more, it will be more chaotic situation, like for debates and the discussion if it's a divided government. But on important issues, I think the public opinion, it has been kind of steady in terms of my office has been very automatic in closing, turn it off, the light. Sorry. I think we will still see certain level of consistency there. I feel like that they will not move so drastically away from what we say, like median voters' preference. So as, for example, William Lai, for example, a lot of people worry about his pro-independence stance. And so he has been, people know that the majority of people in Taiwan actually prefer the status quo. And so it kind of has already constrained him and coming out and say publicly that he is going to adhere to what the Tsai administration's approach is toward China. So I think on major issues, we will see less of the difference, but on other issues, maybe more so. But kind of echoing what Richard was saying, it really also depends on who wins the presidency. If it's a KMT and TPP, the intra-party coalition, the division, that will be a first time for Taiwan. So I don't even know. There's like too many moving parts if that's the case. And we kind of have to wait until that really plays out to be able to determine or be more precise in terms of what the following outcome will be.
Steve?
Richard?
I would just like to endorse and reaffirm what Professor Yan said about the importance of civil society groups. Taiwan politics have really changed, and active minorities have been able to have an impact that far exceeds the number of people involved. There is an intolerance of indirect representative government and a desire for direct democracy. The Sunflower Movement was only the most vivid example of that, but there are lots. And I think the next 4 years will be, a field day for civil society movements. Thanks.
We have a question from the audience. At this point in time, what meaningful differences can we expect from KMT TPP for ticket with Ko as presidential candidate versus one with Ho as presidential candidate? What are Ko and Ho's policy leadership differences, and how much will they shine through in a coalition government? Thoughts?
I guess I will take that. Okay, so first, I think there is a higher likelihood that if they do have joint tickets, Ho Yu would be the presidential candidate, and Ko will be the vice president candidate. And if that's the case, then I think it will be the KMT stance. But if in a situation in which that Ko does turn out to be the presidential candidate, then I think we do not really know what his real stance is, because so far he has been campaigning solely on taking down the TPP. That's like his main slogan. And other than that, he hasn't been very consistent with regard to his policy platform. So he talks a lot, but there's not a lot of policy platform. And because most of the conversation and the tension has been about forming coalition, there hasn't been much scrutiny over, debates over the real policy stance. So I think hopefully once this settles, when we do have a confirm who are on the tickets and how many people are running, we will enter. We're at what, 59 days, counting down, like within 2 month period, counting down to the election day. So far, there hasn't been much substantive discussions on policy. I'm hoping that we will be able to see that play out a little bit more in the last 2 months of election.
Steve, if I could add.
Yep.
In elected governments so far, the pattern has been the president is the dominant person on the team, and the vice president has more of a ceremonial role. If you move into a coalition government context, you really have to work out a division of labor and have a more significant role for the vice president. Professor Yan is nodding her head, so I'm glad she agrees. And I am sure that there has been no discussion of that. They're too busy just trying to figure out how they're going to pick their candidate. We went for centuries without giving our vice presidents a role. But in this, what may be a new situation, I think it's a necessity. Also, I would only observe that Mayor Ho and Chairman Ka have very different personalities. And that will be a factor.
Yeah, maybe I want to come in here and say a few words. Maybe the fact that they have not come up with clear platforms is a good news for working out a coalition, because after they stressed on they come up with clear platforms, then the differences may be very visible in public. So it's very difficult for them to work together. And now, since they don't have clear platforms, especially on the Koenja side, then probably this is good news for the coalition to take place, right?
Well, and it's fortunate in this case that they have 4 months between the election and the inauguration to work a lot of this stuff out.
And I would simply add to that Koenja, as I have heard him and know him, will be a very, very difficult coalition member. He's not a coalition person. And that the personal interaction there is going to be very interesting.
Right, and also on the KMT side, if you read the news, there are people who strongly oppose to this kind of coalition. So we don't know whether ultimately it will work, but before they take they force this coalition before they take strong positions on various kinds of issues. Probably that's good news.
Yeah, is unpredictable, and that's going to be difficult, I think.
Yeah, but I think we will. I mean, the registration day is November 20th, so regardless, we will know who will be running after November 20th. Yes. So, but from now, we still have 6 days, and based on how quickly Taiwan politics changes, I would say there might be more surprises waiting for us.
Yep.
True. Another question from the audience. Will Beijing ever acknowledge that public opinion in Taiwan towards unification is not a conspiracy, but a genuine and deep formulation that requires a more accommodating policy?
Well, I think Beijing definitely recognizes public sentiments in the Taiwan island. But at the same time, popular opinions change as situation change. Okay? They used to be very pro unification, now somewhat pro status independence, and most people are pro status quo. And who knows? In 20 years, 10 or 20 years, they will remain. There will be, what kind of situation we are facing. So, and also, I think popular opinion of a different of a certain part of your country does not give the people the right to seize the territory from that country. Even that's the case for the U.S. For a state of the U.S. to split from the Union, you need at least, I think, 2/3 of the Senate or the states to approve. So if we allow residents of a particular area of a country to decide where the territory they live on would become, then the world would be a big mess. then probably what Russia did would be legitimized with Ukraine.
Richard, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
The coercion without violence policy.
Yes.
The last 3 or 4 months, there's been a real intensification of the integration policy. There have been meetings held in Fujian and most provinces, and talk of greater business connections and more people-to-people relations, et cetera, et cetera. How does China pursue what's basically a contradictory policy? On the one hand, coercion without violence, and on the other hand, people's diplomacy trying to make integration more acceptable to the people of Taiwan and more profitable, because you're basically canceling all of your carrots with your sticks, but you're also undermining your sticks with your carrots. So it's a funny dual policy, isn't it, of both integration and coercion without violence?
I think you're right. I would wager that Beijing, first of all, is going to try and cultivate those elements of Taiwan society that it feels are unhappy with the current government, and that perhaps it can bind them to PRC interests. This would especially be true of the business community, but my understanding is that the business climate in China for all external companies is not getting better, it's getting worse. Right. And the KMT leader of a large corporation had his company fined because he gave money to both the KMT and the DPP, which is very common in Taiwan. I think that the increasing people-to-people and a sense of common feelings, what's sometimes called spiritual unification, I think, or this is an effort to try and address the Taiwan identity problem. Maybe they feel that Beijing feels that it is not done enough to promote a Chinese sense of identity, and so why not give it a try? But I agree that, you know, when you're doing coercion without violence at the same time, when you are essentially negating the one country, two systems system in Hong Kong, the prospects of success probably aren't great, but that's the card they have to play.
Okay. Another question from the audience. Why don't Taiwan youth seem to care that Ko has such an underdeveloped cross-strait policy approach? Is it not a main priority for them, or is Ko appealing because of his relaxed approach? What makes Ko's mainland policy attractive to young people? Was it his relaxed approach? That's the question.
So first of all, it is true that most of Ko's core supporters are young people, and it's actually young, educated male is his core supporters. Like young, like 20 to 29 male, college educated is the profile that he attracts the most. My understanding is that for a lot of this group of young people, they grew up after Taiwan democratized, and they were ruled under the DPP for 8 years. So I think it's very, to some extent, it's very reasonable. Like they kind of view all the parties as the same, and they feel like they deserve an alternative to existing establishment, like established. So there's I would say a level of populist sentiment in how current the campaign and attract his voters. Hence, what matters is him as an alternative to the established parties. That is his appeal. So what he really runs on is not the most important factor, I would say, for a lot of his core supporters. So I think I think Richa pointed out very nicely, it's up in the air whether his core supporters would actually endorse him if he does run a joint ticket with the KMT, because he has been campaigning about anti-establishment, choose me for a change, for a better change. I'm not the establishment. So he has been like campaigning on this, but he's now joining the establishment. Well, how that would play out, whether his core supporters will still support him, I think is a big question that we will need to observe.
Okay. Another question from the audience. What is the United States red line towards the cross-strait relationship? If coercion without violence will lead to the damage of Taiwan's security or democracy, e.g. sending jets or severe cyber attacks, does that cross the United States red line?
Well, since it's my concept, I think rhetorically it already has crossed, because if you read administration speeches, they characterize PRC policy towards Taiwan as coercion. The cleverness of this strategy is that it's without violence, and so it's harder to oppose in a robust way. There's also how we might challenge it in a governmental way. I mean, when it comes to military affairs, we have the Pentagon, and their full-time job is to prepare for war, and sometimes they do a good job of it. But we don't have an agency responsible for opposing coercion. That really has to be a whole of government process, and getting a kind of integrated approach is hard. I think the Biden administration has been trying. This boosting public confidence is also a job for the Taiwan government. Taiwan politicians, more than anyone's, are the ones who have to make the case to Taiwan people why they shouldn't sort of give up, basically. But this is there is no red line on this one. It's sort of pink, and it's wider than a military red line. And it's hard to know when Beijing has gone too far.